Okay, welcome to the program. Charles Moscowitz here. Michael D. Shaw is my guest and co-host as usual. Mike, thanks for joining me as always.
Always fun, always interesting.
Hopefully. So I'm taking this course at Arizona State University on religion and international politics. And this professor is really a doozy, but it's just a chance to take a look at what liberals are thinking, both privately and publicly. The main bugbear for him is Christian nationalism and nationalism in general. I mean, he's an internationalist. The first scholarly article I had to read, and it's one of these long, laborious, boring intellectual articles that goes on for 30 pages
Uh,
to discuss something that really could have been said in about 3 pages, and filled with lots of, this is classic. I don't know how these people, cope with this. I mean, it's just academic jargon, and I think that one of the reasons why I think they do it is because I think they're required to publish, and you can't just publish a short pamphlet. You have to, there's word quotas. You have to have a certain number of words. So they just pump it up with all this garbage. I mean, it's so, dull and so, laborious to kind of
what was it like reading, though? I mean, what we
horrible.
used to say back when I was in college. What was this girl once said? It was so boring she had to put toothpicks under her eyelids to hold everything up.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, it's so unnecessarily dull and it's so pretentious. And so the thing that really bugs me is it's so indirect. They won't come out and say, but if I distill it down to its basic essence, the article is saying, is recognizing that their one world government, New World Order, has failed because they didn't have religion. They were atheist. And therefore, how can we take on some of the trappings of religion to make it more successful in the future without becoming religious? Know how to fool people. And it kind of mirrors an article, a book I read by in my last course on Islamic studies by Hassan al-Banna, who was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, who says, and wrote this in the 1920s at a time when both Nazism and communism were on the march. And he said, I admire both Nazism and communism. These are great centralized movements to create a new world. But the one thing that they lack that we have is religion, the Islamic way. So, they're trying to come up with the equivalent of the Islamic way to promote their world order. But going back to this professor, he talks about very disparagingly about a change in public policy by President Trump from Obama, which Trump is promoting on a foreign policy issue, the idea of religious freedom, as opposed to Obama, who didn't care or who was ambivalent. There was nothing said about it. And he equates this to a conspiracy on the part of Trump to help Christian proselytizing, which is crazy. But on the one hand, he's so upset and so paranoid about Christians proselytizing around the world, but he has no problem with mass migration of Muslims into Europe and the United States. And to oppose that, one is a bigot and one is a racist. He singles out Viktor Orban from Hungary in particular as someone who was not accepting of Muslim migration. And he then says that Christian nationalists like Trump, who he puts in that category, form an informal collusion with Christian nationalists in other countries like Orban and whatnot to suppress transgender rights and homosexuality.
Oh dear, oh dear.
And to hurt Muslim immigration and all these other particulars.
Well, this is a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And some of these idiotic liberals, apparently like your professor, think that, well, for now, we will align with these Muslims. But then, when we achieve whatever this nirvana is, then somehow we'll disalign from them.
Of course, they'd be the first people that they'll get their heads chopped off if Muslims take over.
It becomes.
And what happens to homosexuals? I mean, if Muslims take over.
Look, I mean, there's so many inconsistencies
in
this thing. And what people like this guy, it's very difficult to justify the atheism of somebody like this. I mean, they just can't wrap their arms around the fact that the church essentially invented Western society. I mean, let's be honest. That's what it is. So there's this resentment somehow. I'm not really sure why, because maybe it's because it doesn't comport with this atheistic worldview. If you tap them on the shoulder while they're ranting in the lecture hall and say, Sonny, what about the whole era beyond the Roman Empire? I mean, how did all that get built up? What was behind that? And it's a harumph, So one of the reasons they get away with it is that you have this monologue that exists in academia. All right. If you speak up, you're going to be shot down. Your grades are going to be affected.
Right.
So these guys could just spout off all this crap endlessly. And it's a terrible environment. It's so contrary to the Platonic and classical method, of how stuff is supposed to be taught. But there you go.
Right. I mean, he's much more open and blunt about it, which is interesting to me as someone who is trying to look at what's going on in colleges and what's going on in the mind and soul of liberals. He doesn't mince words. I mean, this is really out there. I mean, he also points to Christian nationalism as being kind of provincial and ignorant, and it's against what he calls cosmopolitanism, which is internationalism. And then he also says that it's tribal, and that he uses an example. Again, he attacks Viktor Orban from Hungary. He's anti-Semitic, he says. Why? What's his proof? Because he criticized George Soros, for crying out loud.
Dear.
I mean, first of all, George Soros, I mean, I don't know if you saw the interview which Soros gave on 60 Minutes. It's available on YouTube, where the reporter, I think it was Steve Croft, he asked him, he says, how do you respond to the fact that as a teenager, you and your father, once the Nazis occupied Hungary in 1944, were working with them, going around and identifying Jewish households so that the Nazis could come in and confiscate the property and send the people off to Auschwitz? Do you remember doing that? You walked around with a cross so people wouldn't know you were Jewish. And his answer was, he had this like wistful, nostalgic look, and he goes, I remember those were very happy times. He says, no regrets? No, anybody, if it wasn't me doing it, it would have been someone else. So I got to do this. He talked about it like it was such an honor. And, and this is like, so he's, to oppose him as being anti-Semitic, first of all, I mean, he was involved with color revolutions all over the world, including here, in his funding radical groups and radical causes against Trump. He funded Israel. He tried to overthrow Netanyahu. I mean, and also Orban is probably one of the most pro-Israel governments in Europe. I mean, this idea that, how can they twist themselves with such venom toward anyone who stands up for the national prerogative of their country, which is what Orban is doing by sealing the border from millions of Muslims who were lining. I don't know if you've seen the videos.
Oh yeah,
the Hungarian border. I mean, any sane nation has the right and the moral obligation to defend its own people and its own culture. I mean, the bigger question that's also not asked is, why is it that Europe or the United States would need to accept mass Muslim migration at all? I mean, Muslims control vast territories. I mean, probably about 25% of the surface of this planet. If you go all the way from the Cape Horn in the Atlantic to the Pacific Islands in Indonesia, you go north to the borders of Siberia, south to the coast of South Africa. These are all Muslim nations, and many of them are oil rich and resource rich, and they have great, talented people who are certainly capable of taking the bull by the horn and improving their own societies. But they don't, because they're wrapped in the same kind of, frankly, regressive ideologies that they want to then import to us. I mean, it's obviously completely illogical. And to then label people who are against that kind of immigration as racist and xenophobic, it's like, is this really what they think? I mean, I think that this guy is a real true believer. I think he does believe this. I mean, I think a lot of liberals.
There are true believers. I mean, Ethel Rosenberg wasn't the first, but that's the mentality that they just stand for this. It doesn't matter. They're going to live or die on this hill, so to speak. And there's nothing you can do to change their minds. I mean, when I was a teenager, I met people who sounded like, I mean, at first I thought it was a joke. It sounded like some radical from the early 1930s, commie type propaganda.
Right.
And this guy was serious. And this is maybe in the 1960s, right?
Sure.
And so something gets to these people. It's a form of self-hatred, and they just get wrapped up in it. And most of them you'll find in academia. And, you know, the trouble is that they're influencing too many of the young people that are forced to listen to this crap.
Well, that's just it. I mean, first of all, every professor at this college has a certain amount of autonomy, and they get to dictate what they want to do. And I think the better ones allow for a forum, like what they call a yellow dig. It's an app where you're asked to put in a comment, you're asked to respond to other people's comments, and everything is kind of debated, and you can see what other people are thinking. It's very interesting. I mean, in my case, I put in a few comments that created a firestorm. But it's interesting, but he doesn't do that. He doesn't want any comments, doesn't want any opposition. He is part of the course. I'm going to be doing a one-on-one with him by Zoom. I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah. And also I'll be part of a forum conversation, which is also going to be pretty interesting. But
now, how do you do this to yourself? I mean, the problem here is that now maybe you're doing this for fodder for your show, and I would get it, but you're not a 20-something starry-eyed kid.
Right.
So how do you put up with it?
Just, I mean, I am. To me, it's like field work for me as a conservative sociologist. It's the equivalent of a zoologist going to the Serengeti and observing elephants in the wild. You know, it's like I'm a social theorist, and this puts me right into the belly to kind of find out what's going on and what these people are thinking. And I actually think that probably when push comes to shove, most liberals don't agree with him when you ask them in their heart of hearts. They're not comfortable with mass migration of Muslims. They may say it publicly. They're not comfortable with sex change operations on children, another issue he's into. You know, they just aren't. But they'll say.
What's his justification for that?
Well, in his case, he really believed in this. What's the justification for any of this?
Well, right, but I mean, the only way you can present as such a lunatic is that you feel you have to check off all these boxes. He can't possibly believe in that. No rational person can.
No, I think he does. I've watched his videos. I've watched how he presents himself. He is what I would call, he's the Ethel Rosenberg type. He's a true believer. He's willing to go down. I've known people like this. They're going to march right into the grave. They'll never change. This is what they believe in. It's a cult. And I don't think it describes most liberals. Unfortunately, most liberals are too stupid to stand up to it, and they're going to vote for it, but they don't really believe in it. He does. You get these, it's a combination of people like him, these hardcore, religious believers, if you will. I mean, I know it's anti-religion. And then you have people, I think, and maybe here I'm going to put on a little tin hat, but you got people at the top of the political, economic, cultural spectrum, the banking establishment types. These people are fully witting and fully conscious practitioners of a very pragmatic philosophy by which they want to reach goals. And that could involve war, it could involve violence. People like historically Cecil Rhodes comes to mind, the Rhodes Roundtable groups. They want to strategize how to create what he called, you see, I have that his book behind me, the Tragedy and Hope. What he wanted was an Anglo-American establishment that would informally run the world. You have the Rothschilds, you've got the Rockefellers, you've got the big private banking conglomerates, you've got people at the top of the secret societies. They're not believers in any of this crap. They know it's garbage, but they're promoting it. George Soros comes to mind. They're promoting it because it fits a very practical agenda, which is a world control. You can even add to that a layer of this new type that are running these AI companies. I'm not saying Elon Musk necessarily, but they've taken on this new, I've heard talk about this from Joe Allen. He's the author of the book Aeons. He's a regular with Steve Bannon. That they have almost their own religion where they believe that there's going to be this perfected human being that is combining both biological and digitized technological elements that will have super consciousness, super knowingness. They're not loyal to anything even on this planet. They want to use up the planet because they see themselves as intergalactic, and that they think that the computer and AI is going to give birth to this whole new reality that we can't even imagine. You have them; they're kind of part of this too. I remember years ago I interviewed someone who was associated with Ray Kurzweil. You know who he is?
Oh yeah, haven't heard that name for a while.
He's I think he's MIT or Harvard. He invented the talking book back in the 1970s, which you could put a book into it, and he did it for Stevie Wonder. Great. I think it's a brilliant invention. He's a great man. And that way it reads the book for you. But he's gotten into this kind of techno-religious thing where he does believe that eventually, and it's based on the theory of evolution, of course, man is going to evolve, or a select group of men and women, elites, are going to evolve into this super consciousness where they're going to have computer components that are going to regulate all elements of their bodies and their minds so they can live to be 200 and beyond. They can have perfect health. They can have super consciousness. It's like a modern day version of the Ubermensch. And that I had one of his followers on my show. Unfortunately, it was at the time before I could tape things. But he was really like one of these glassy-eyed, the type. They're like, you see this frankly amongst people that are ultra Christian too, I should say, or ultra Jewish, where they're like in a trance. It's so like, everything is like scheduled up. I mean, everything is figured out. And
that's one of the unified theory of everything, people. They have it figured out.
Exactly. There's an answer. everything fits into a certain narrative. Michael Jones is like that, right? With his anti-Jewish thing, everything goes into this narrative by which the Jew is the enemy, and that, whatever happens, somehow we'll find a Jew behind it to show that the Jew is here to destroy the world. They're enemies of mankind. And once you accept that premise, you can fit in and plug in little factoids where you find lousy Jews. I mean, there are plenty of them out there. And you'll say, aha, look at this. Anyway, the point is that this is what this guy's into. And I don't think that most liberals are. I think that they are either completely duped or slightly brainwashed, or they just are afraid.
Well, I think it's the fear factor. They somehow believe that they have to check off all those boxes. And the reason that this guy doesn't allow any commentary is that deep down, he knows he's full of crap.
Right.
But as long as he shuts off the argument, then it's not a problem. Then he can pontificate all this stuff. But the trouble is that he realizes also that this whole shtick could only exist in an academic environment, and he should be very happy. I think ASU now, if I'm not mistaken, is the biggest undergraduate university in the country.
Probably.
Based on the enrollment on campus and the people like you that are doing it online. So he's got a relatively big audience, but you just can't deal with these people. I mean, if you are able to somehow remove them from their home environment, you're just going to watch their head explode and not really accomplish anything. It's kind of like Paul Ehrlich. He just had to die. That was the only way he was going to stop. Okay. And he developed a cult following, and that was it. And he would be proven wrong every single time, every idea he ever had.
But he hung on, he went on with the ship. He's like, this is my dime, and I'm spending it. This is it.
Yeah.
There's not going to be any, people, we've talked about this. It's a phenomenon. It's a human phenomenon that once people lock into something like these things, they are in it, and they don't want to kind of have any kind of a soul searching on any of it. Results in them having to disavow whole portions of their life. And most people don't have the courage or the intelligence, frankly, to do this. They're like on automatic pilot. They've landed on this planet, and they're staying there, and that's that. They're going to go down with it. I know people like that. And in the case of this professor, I just don't know if it's strictly that he's a true believer. I think that he is, or is he affiliated with some of these elite world order types? The Illuminati. I don't know. I mean, are they he's there as an operative to try to, I mean, he obviously is promoting world government. I mean, these scholarly articles that I've read that he assigns one after the other is into strategizing how to preserve world government. And, it's completely contradictory because he views Christian nationalism as authoritarian, which it's not. But yet at the same time, world government movements have included both communism and Nazism, and now it includes radical Islam. That's, is this the world government? It's the only way a world government can try to happen. It'll never happen, God forbid, but it requires this complete authoritarian control over every aspect of the lives of the people that are subject to it. And ultimately, it does require world control, because if they don't control everybody, and there are some people that are free and outside of it, then they might risk waking everybody else up, right? And causing.
Well, that's the World Economic Forum. And if you talk to people like, what's his name, the BlackRock guy, Larry
Schwab, I mean.
So they think the only way they're going to impose these wonderful values is we have to control everybody. So the last time they tried this, and thank God it failed, was the COVID pandemic.
Oh yeah, the biggest one of our lifetime, and I think they're going to do it again. I don't know if it's going to be the same narrative, but I assume that there's going to be another authoritarian worldwide event coming up, probably within the next maybe 20 years, 30 years. I don't know what it is. I think they're tinkering right now with the idea of alien invasion. Now, right? I mean, it was what was it called? The Iron Mountain Report, 1965. I have a copy of it somewhere.
Oh boy! Oh boy!
It was the head of it was Harvard economist John Kenneth Galbraith, right? And it was this think tank that took, I think, 3 years of intense study and conferences and secretive conferences to come up with this blueprint for where they thought the world should be and what their strategy would be to create the one world order. And they came up with three, they said there has to be a crisis to make people give up their freedoms. And they came up with three potential crises. One of them was global warming, environment, something in the environment is going to threaten to.
It started off as global cooling, by the way, in the early 70s.
And then you had, and by the way, speaking of which, you had the that pollster, that Republican pollster, I forget his name, that heavyset guy, very influential. He advised, he said, change the name from global warming to climate change.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't really
a little more open.
Yeah, you can't really prove that there's global warming. But the first tenet was global, some kind of environmental doom, Armageddon. Something is going to happen where everyone is going to burn to death or something. I think they even started with remember the ozone hole opening in space?
And we had to stop
acid rain, and you had just different, I think they floated different things like that. Now it's nanoparticles of microplastics.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the first line of attack. The second line of attack, I don't really remember what it is. I'm going to have to look it up. But I know the third one was aliens out from outer space landing on Earth. And that's the one that I think they're tinkering with now. I see this.
Of course, here's the problem with that there's no possibility that will ever happen for so many reasons.
Mm-hmm.
That it's going to be interesting to see how this is promoted. Now, you might be able to get away with it based on the fact that I guess most people don't understand basic physics. Okay, the hazards of space travel are never going to be overcome with any technology that you can even free associate with. The distances are phenomenal. The amount of radiation exposure, the time involved in such a voyage, the amount of energy required, it's just not going to happen. Okay?
Right.
And, so it will be interesting as a thought experiment to see how the people react to this. I mean, do they really think, like in the Star Wars movies, you could just push a button and go to light speed? Even with
their thesis is that artificial intelligence and the computer is going to become so intelligent at some point that it's
going to overcome the laws of physics. Okay.
Yeah, that it's going to figure out things that we can't even imagine. The other one that's kind of bugging me, and this one scares me actually, and this one might be very real, is this information that the national or even the international, but I think it's more the national deficit is something like $30 trillion, and that at this point it's I don't know how many billions of dollars a day, if not a minute, that it's costing us. So when you think about that is scary. I think that is real. That could be something that really could hit and has hit us in the past. I think it has to do with the manipulation of currencies by the central banking establishment, and that they've always played a role in that. I've written a book about this. But I think that that's the system we have, and that could happen. What do you think?
Of course, at least that is theoretically possible. But they've been warning about that since the early 1960s.
True.
That debt is going to crash, and all hell is going to break loose, and so on and so forth. But somehow it doesn't matter. The same way, I think, that if global warming is true, how come coastal properties are still expensive and you can get bank loans for them?
That's right. How come Obama bought that house in Martha's Vineyard, right on the ocean front?
Yeah.
For like a big sum of money. I mean, I think he bought it from Jackie Onassis estate. That's huge. I mean, and all these other people, Taylor Swift, James Taylor, they all own these beautiful estates right on the cliffs of Martha's Vineyard, overlooking the ocean. These are the top global warmer people. They're promoting that. So, yeah, I mean, that does raise a question. Maybe they're not concerned. I don't know. But
so I think what happens with this debt thing is that maybe if something does happen with it, it will be someone will push a button somewhere, because we've been living under this forever, with so many hundreds of billions, and now so many trillions.
I suppose every time we hear about it, probably going back to the 60s, it's such an astronomical figure.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just a repeat of the same playbook, because, it sounds so astronomical. I trust this administration, that they know what they're doing. People like Besant and Lutnick, and even Trump is a businessman. I mean, they must know what to do. I don't know, but at least it's better with them in place than some of these crackpots who were involved going back to Clinton, who were into like complete free trade, and doesn't matter what the deficit is, it goes on forever, it's good. At least they're not into that, and they probably know what the score is. So maybe I'm naively just trusting in that. I don't know.
I suppose you can trust in it, but on the other hand, there's not a whole hell of a lot you can do about it. And going back to this alien thing for a minute, if some technology is somehow able to overcome at least our understanding of the laws of physics, then really, what are you going to do about it? Okay, if someone could overcome the fact that as you approach light speed, mass becomes infinite, and you figure out a way to do that, then you know what? More power to you, I guess.
I'm going to put the tin hat back on here for a second and talk about the dominant issue in the news all summer. If you look at, Tom Yamas, who took Lester Holt's place, or David Muir, or any of these people, the 6 o'clock, the official news givers, the first story is the weather, the flooding, the fires, the tornadoes, and that they show the horror of this, and it is horrible. But
I know we never had tornadoes before.
Well, there's tornadoes. There's a certain. I think there's only 2 places in the world that have them, because of the way it's a geological thing, and that is the central United States and Argentina. That's what I've understood.
Yeah.
But the point is that I have seen enough programs over the years. Again, tin hat, granted, I'm not an expert, but it indicates that there are technologies by which the weather can be controlled, by which the HARP technology up in Alaska.
I've been talking about that for years.
Yeah, and it's more than that. What they call the DEWS, DEWS, the digital. I don't know what that exactly stands for, but and maybe I'm listening to people that are a little bit out there, like Seth Holhouse over at Man in America, very good podcast. But he has people on, who talk about this. Other people who have talked about it. They say that in Iran, for example, the Iranians knocked out the radar installations in Bahrain and in Kuwait that were there to regulate the weather over Iran to make it drought-like. And that was a big setback in that war. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know where they got that. These things seem to me to be somewhat classified, even if they are true. But I do wonder if this isn't part of the Iron Mountain structure here, where you have these catastrophic weather conditions that do seem like they're a little bit more accentuated than in the past. And that is this something that is being manipulated by technologies, by people who want to create a new chaos to get us to surrender our freedoms?
I think the best way to answer that is my old favorite grain of truth. All right. Some of this technology does exist in a primitive form, but I don't believe that you can go up to the HARP installation in Alaska and focus this energy in a particular place and, to your absolute desire, control the weather when you want it, how you want it. I think that's
Okay.
way down the road, but can you, on a much more limited basis, focus something on some nebulous area and cause some small effect? Absolutely. Okay. Remember, it's a long way from taking a tiny particle and accelerating it in an accelerator in Switzerland to near light speed to ever be able to do anything like that on a practical scale.
Okay.
Maybe it will.
It just seems to me that, I just wonder if there's some kind of a coordination here, and the fact that this is the main news story every night, with the undertone that this is all because of global warming, and that we have to surrender our freedoms. I mean,
I desperately want it to be true, because the only way you're going to control the population is with some crisis. And it came damn close during COVID.
of course. Well, that's such a blatant one, but I mean, we were talking earlier about whether or not they're going to do another one like that, where there's going to be a real event and that they're plotting. I happen to think that they probably are going to try something else. Why wouldn't they? This is what they do. The question is what and when, and whether or not enough people are woke enough or aware enough, awakened enough, I should say,
Yeah.
to know better this time around.
Okay, well, then we get kind of depressing for a while. As I've said a couple of times, the whole COVID thing was an intelligence test, and virtually everybody failed. All right.
Yes.
I was overwhelmingly depressed how quickly people succumb to it, and not just the average schmuck.
Right.
I'm talking about the medical community. It was unbelievable. I mean, it didn't make any sense. And then the icing on the cake was to discover that Tony Fauci himself took the damn shot.
Right, which was surprising to me.
That was surprising to me.
Yeah.
But he became such and maybe.
And then he covered up the reaction.
Okay, and maybe, and I use this expression, which may mean something to some people. There was a movie from the 90s called Lady Hawk, and it had to do with a curse that was finally at the end lifted. It had to do with night and day, and the curse was lifted because of an eclipse where night and day exists at the same time. So maybe the eclipse here is that the true believers just don't get it, and they're not going to be able to. Evidently, they weren't able to take over everybody. There was Canadian truckers,
The
There were
Canadian
people
thank God for
like
that.
me that figured, this doesn't smell right. I'm not going to take it. And as I've said, finally, we were able to find our sources for vaccine cards. There were not a lot, but there were some doctors that were writing these out for people.
Yeah, and now it turned out that Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers and a lot of the other head football guys, and they had fake vax cards.
Yeah,
because they had
which was what was really encouraging. That this certainly wasn't advertised, but you could go out there and you could find this, and that was your golden ticket. Had this thing become ridiculous. The other thing
they were on the way to getting digitized cards, and that's when the Canadian truckers stepped in. Those digitized cards. Look, Alex Jones has been talking about this for years, that eventually they would be implanted under the skin, and that you'd have to, you'd have a barcode on you like you were a can of peas, and that in order to go into a public venue, you'd have to be buzzed in or not. China already is doing something like this. They've got the Obamacare had Corey scores already, where they get to decide who gets health care and who doesn't based on their score, which includes things like age or pre-existing conditions, or probably who knows what else. The point is that once you have that in place, freedom is over. We're done. That's going to be, every human being will be nothing more than a commodity to be controlled. It's just, we really bit the bullet that time with the Canadian truckers. But they're going to try again. They took it away, but they didn't get rid of it, and they didn't end the laws. They just decided to quietly stop them for now and leave them in place.
Okay, I remember vividly a show that you and I had during that time, and you said, okay, what's going to happen with all this stuff? And I said, well, for those in the audience that are old enough to remember, the gas lines in the early 1970s. And the way it was enforced in California and some other states were, if you had an even license number, it was certain days, and an odd license number was certain days. That was never officially repealed.
Right.
They just stopped enforcing it.
They just stopped it, but they left it in place for later in case they need to resurrect it. And that's, I think, true with most of these COVID laws. I remember, I think it was Judge Eileen Cannon, one of the few federal judges who actually has some nerves, and it was actually taking a few minutes to read the Constitution. She put a stop to the airlines enforcing COVID cards to get on the plane. So no, you can't do that. And there was an uproar. I remember my liberal people in my own circle were like, oh, this is, right-wing rogue judge all of a sudden. The judge, now the rogue judge, that doesn't apply. But in that case, it did. So you have people once in a while who will step up and who will put a stop to these things. The only question is, what are they going to do next? I mean, that's such a pessimistic today, but
well, I guess we just have to see some sort of crisis. But you can't keep obsessing about this stuff.
No.
Or then you turn into an Ethel Rosenberg on the other side.
You can't. Well, I learned this when I was at the American Freedom Network, and I think I've mentioned this. Just about every other day, I'd have a guest wanting to come on or on one of the other shows about the end of the world. We're going to have, they're going to spray the skies with poison and, death. I remember this one guy had this book called "Death is in the Air," about how they're going to be spreading. I remember "Death is in the air," da 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 da. But it got to be very depressing, and this was at a time, quite honestly, when we had just had our baby, and I was wanting to feel good, and I was feeling good and positive about everything. And I was like, I want to know that there's going to be a future in the world, if for no other reason than for my child to grow up in.
Right.
I can't live like this. I can't have this kind of feeling like everything is going to, there's an Armageddon right around the corner and that everything is going to fall apart. And I also came to realize that even if these things were true, and by the way, some of it was true. I mean, they predicted COVID back then. There's going to be a lab leak at Fort Detrick. Eventually, of course, Fauci arranged for all that stuff to be transferred to the Wuhan lab. But the point is that even if that were true, there's not a darn thing I can do about it. We can't control that. We're not, there's people, behind the scenes, the Illuminati, call it whatever you want. We can't do anything about them.
Well, even on a more prosaic level, and maybe this will make sense to the viewers here, where you realize on a very primitive level that there are things outside of your control. And I remember some years ago, I was on a business trip, and in the morning I started jogging around the hotel, and I come onto a street, and I'm going down this residential area, and there's two big dogs, maybe 100 feet ahead, and I'm thinking, gee, I hope they're friendly. What are you going to do at that point, right? So I just ran on. Everything was fine. There was no problem. But it was that sort of thing that, hey, you know what? There's really nothing I could do here. I mean, if I'm going to get attacked, I'll try to defend myself. But It's like, there's no intellectual AI way, so to speak, to overcome this thing. And I'm just going to have to go with it. And that's exactly what you're saying here, that you can't, live in fear all the time. It doesn't help. There's no practical benefit.
And we all take risks occasionally. I mean, I take more than average risks. I mean, one of the things that I've done is I drove Uber. And I recall an incident where I used to drive sometimes at night. I don't longer. But I picked up these three guys right after a terror attack in Belgium with these radical Islamists machine gunned an airport. It was horrible. They were all three of them were these big Muslim guys with traditional robes. They had the beard cut the traditional Islamic way.
Yeah.
Two of them got in the back seat. One of them sat next to me, and they were very silent. And it was and I felt like, yeah, my life was going before my eyes. I'm like, I was like, is this really a way to go? I mean, this is, and I kept like glancing at this guy's hands. I was waiting for him to make a move. It was like, it was very chilling. And they said nothing. As I finally approached their destination, they then turned out to be fine. They turned out to be gentlemen. They thanked me. Thank you. Take care. No problem. But the point is that, I mean, you don't know who anybody is. You're taking risks. Now, we all have situations in life where we put ourselves in some risky situations. You have to calculate it. You have to make an estimate of, I mean, since then, I'm much actually a little more careful about who I do pick up. And I don't go to certain places you just have to figure out your level of comfort, with regard to risk is I guess my point here.
How long a ride was it though? You were probably uncomfortable for a while.
I was, and it was very kind of like, you do see your life go. It's anytime you're in a physical risk, you do tend to take stock of what you've done in your life, and you wonder how it's going to be when you're no longer around. All that stuff. It's just the way it is. It's human nature. And you prepare to fight, which I was, but it would have been good.
It would have been a better story if you had dropped him off at some location that was in it was a terror attack. But I'm glad.
No, they turned out to be fine. It was not. And they could tell that I was nervous, I think. But it could have gone. Who knows? You don't know who someone is. I mean, that's
right. But then see, that puts it in perspective. You can worry about what's going to happen with global warming in 40 years, or what's going to happen in the next 10 seconds with these people that I've picked up.
Yeah, I mean, that's how terrorism works. You look at what they deal with in Israel. All of a sudden you have like a missile hitting your house it's about as big as like 3 gigantic 6-wheeler trucks. I mean, it's the Israelis, I'm amazed by how resilient they are. Somehow, in the face of this kind of like constant threat by people, a very sophisticated threat, and one that they carry out constantly to wipe everyone out. You go there, I've been there many times. I don't know if they're in a state of denial. They don't think, they kind of compartmentalize, but they're very cheerful people. They're very upbeat. They're, there was recently a survey done. I don't remember the name of it, but on the happiness level of peoples in different countries. And Israel came up near the top.
Yeah.
These are people who their sons and daughters have been kidnapped and tortured and murdered and raped, and and yet somehow, that society is very resilient. It's not what it was, because when I was there in 1990, it was a much more open place, because I remember I was able to go out and look at ruins in Judea and Samaria, which is, the West Bank or the East Jordan or whatever you want to call it. And it was just with a tour guide in a Jeep. We took pictures. We just, you can't do that now. Once the terrorism started and the increase in hatred started, and you had people putting on a bomb vest and blowing themselves up in a pizza parlor to kill as many Jews as possible, or going to a lounge at Hebrew University and blowing themselves up, Israel started to respond by putting in checkpoints and building fences and creating, more permanent structures. And in a sense, it worked. They reduced that kind of activity by like 98%. But it created a kind of a closed off situation. Israelis now more commonly carry weapons. You no longer have the the ability to be relaxed and free in that country because of this. And Israelis are a little bit more circumspect. I've given the example of, like, on the holiday of Purim, traditionally you get out on the street and you celebrate and you wear funny costumes, and the kids get to dress up like Queen Esther and, pass out candy. Well, terrorists set up bombs in Tel Aviv one year during that, and they blew up the place, and children's bodies were thrown. You'd find a piece of their skull halfway down the street and bloody limbs everywhere. So now Israelis don't do that anymore. They don't have that outside celebration. They do it inside. They kind of look within. And I guess that's just how it has to be. That's a reality. But it's also worrisome, because you have to look at history. That's why the Crusades failed in Israel. When the Frankish king set up the kingdom of Jerusalem after the First Crusade, what was it, Baldwin, I think his name was?
Yeah.
There was celebration. They sent for their wives and children to come, and they came. And a group of them went down to the Jordan River to enjoy it and to celebrate and have a picnic and to do like a baptism. And suddenly you had a group of Saracens, which is what they called Arabs back then, come out and they commit a massacre. One person escaped. It was actually a young girl. She was able to get back to Jerusalem and tell them what happened. And their response was to raise up the wall, to put in, like the gate, and to build moats. And they started to wall themselves off. And that was the beginning of the end, because they became afraid to go outside. They became like insular. They started to they couldn't deal with this enemy, and they started to look within. and it was really the beginning of the end for the Crusader states. And that's a concern for Israel. But yet the Israelis are not. They are going to the beach. They're out there. They're not like they don't think about it. I mean, I'm talking about this because I may be going to Israel next year. I was thinking to finish my degree at ASU. I may do a semester abroad in Israel to use my podcast to do a survey of Israeli society, to interview people from all sides. I mean, of course, my daughter says that I shouldn't because what will happen is, as a naive American, I'll go to the West Bank, I'll interview some Palestinian Arabs, I'll interview some far radical Jewish settlers, and I'll end up being shot. That's, and that's, I mean, I'll try, I'm going to try to do it in a way that's a little bit more curated, but I feel compelled to do it, and I'm probably going to do that next spring. Anyway, that's why I'm talking about this.
Well, that's that's interesting, but I guess it's all relative. I mean, when I was a kid, it was nothing at all at age 9, let's say, to ride your bike a mile or so away by yourself to a local park, meet the kids to play baseball or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, how many parents would let their kid do that now?
Look, I agree with you. I mean, same thing with me. When I was a kid, my parents left the door open. We would come and go. We would stay out and kick ball on the street until it was dark. We were totally unsupervised. We go to the quarries even, which is dangerous. But we would go out in Quincy, where I grew up, and hang out with friends and just do whatever we wanted. We weren't even paying attention to the time. Nobody worried about it. But now, even with my daughter, we were like, helicopter. We actually, I mean, maybe, my wife and I overdid it, but we actually had like an app where we could see where each other are. So we could see where she was. She shut that off eventually, but, my wife and I still check each other out where we are. And there's some sense to that, especially if I'm driving Uber. But I mean, I'm bringing this up only to say that it's all
things change. I mean, when I learned to drive in California, the thing that was absolutely sacrosanct was that if somebody stepped off the curb and got onto the crosswalk, everybody stopped. All the cars stopped. Okay? And I'm telling you, the easiest way to fail your driver's exam was if there was a line of cars stopped to your right or left, and you kept going through, the exam was over. All right? That was absolutely sacrosanct. And then maybe 15 years later, this crosswalk thing just disappeared. It's still on the books, but that whole thing disappeared. And I thought at that time, okay, what is it? Immigration? I don't know. Something changed, and there was no looking back. So I'd be interested in what your ASU guy thinks about all that. What happened to society?
I'm going to try to, I think when I meet him, I'm going to be very careful about choosing my words and keeping it to maybe one or two themes. I'm not going to get diverted because it's only a certain amount of time, and I want to just accomplish a couple of things. And you can't, I don't want to come in, and hit him over the head with anything. I want to be, sometimes you get a lot further by just kindly using some kindness and introduce a few things.
Well, here's your basic question, which I know you won't ask you. How did you get like this?
You mean that kind of approach?
No, I mean, it would be, okay, he's got these hardcore liberal left-wing ideas. Okay. How did you come to this?
Well, I mean, maybe it's from having done talk radio for all these years, and I'd have liberals on my show,
No, no, no. I'm saying you ask him. How did he?
Oh, how did he come to this? Well, that's right. Where did he come up with this? What I don't know much about him. He doesn't really list a biography. I don't know if he's married. I don't know. He's
because it seems to me that it's contrary to human experience. So, what in your life caused you to go against human experience?
Human nature, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So there was some event that convinced you that your basic instinct is wrong about everything. Because it's contrary to the natural law, all right?
Right.
That you should have some concept of good and evil and self-preservation. So how do you go against this? What got into your head to change you to become this individual and believe all the stuff?
Yeah, and I think you made the point. I mean, that what he's into is not natural to human instincts. I mean, what comes to mind as you say this is the issue of open borders and immigration. It is not natural for any society or any person to simply open up their borders and let anybody come in. It's no different than the family having their own home. You don't let someone come into your home unless you invite them. You don't just open the border. You don't swing the door open and say, "Come on in." And even when you invite them, you decide when they leave. You decide their conduct while they're in your home. They're your guest. When you're visiting someone else's home, you observe their basic rules in that place. That's their domicile. It's no different for a nation. The nation decides, it's one of the most basic functions of a sovereign state. It decides who comes into the national home and why. It doesn't need to explain it. And for him to say this is religious nationalism, no. It's normal instinct for all people, any nation.
Well, here's what I think it is. And this may sound aggressive if you use this with him. It seemed just like the Stockholm syndrome. And he's identifying with the kidnappers, if you will. And he's a weak individual, and he's been effeminized.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I don't want to go down that road, but
but it's contrary to human nature.
Yeah, it is, and yeah, exactly, and yet, and I think that as we started, because we should probably wrap it up, but I think that most liberals in their heart of hearts don't believe this stuff, but they go for it because they want to keep their head low. They don't want to be in trouble. They know that sex change for children is wrong, but they don't want to say it. Whereas you have two types, this guy who is a believer in all of this stuff. He actually does think that this is virtuous. Or you have the New World Order types who know it's not good, but who want to weaken people, who want to create a world order by creating discord and by forcing people to become divided. Anyway, so Mike, what do you have coming up on your Substack?
Well, I mean, this is, related to this professor of yours.
Okay.
That he's advocating stuff that's essentially an inversion of reality, okay? Yeah. Which I believe is satanic.
Yes.
So taking him as an example, why does he believe this? Every single thing you're talking about here, the fact that you won't even accept your own sex, what is that other than satanic? You're attempting to deny absolute reality, and change it in a horrific, violent manner.
Not only that, but to then advocate other people do it and use force to make them do it. Ultimately, that is what really makes it satanic. It's like, it's one thing if you want to abuse yourself, that's bad, but to advocate this as a virtue, to other people that this
Well,
is
everything that's satanic is basically just an inversion of reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
If Jesus died at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, the big witchy hour for all this crap is always at 3 a.m. Okay.
Yeah.
The satanic cross symbol is an upside down cross.
Yeah, the satanic path. They just
Continue
take
this.
it and invert it.
Yeah, you can continue this all the way down the line. It's always the negative or the inverse of, let's call it, polite society.
Yeah.
So what took over his mind, other than some demonic influence, because the demons
Yeah.
hate humans, all right? And you know, so if I'm sure you're not going to go down this road,
No.
but he would be very defensive if you accused him of just being possessed, which I believe he is.
Which I think that I agree with you completely. It's satanic. And you know, it's the kind of thing that I'm not going to go there, you know, directly, but I'm going to go. I'll certainly do it by trying to smoke out the devil.
Yeah.
Through basically speaking basic truths and trying to make that contrast with what he's into, which is a false, inverted thing, and that's sort of the approach. Anyway.
Well, I'll put it this way: that's the closest to a so-called unified theory of everything that I've ever been able to come up with.
I agree with that completely. When you get down to it, it is the battle between God and Satan. The good, the influence of the truths about inalienable rights, and the satanic influence that wants to subvert those rights. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. So, Mike, anyway, as always, I want to thank you for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day and week, and we will see you next time.
Indeed. Thanks a lot.
Bye.